In Chapter 4 of Poppy Playtime, significant revelations were made that had a major impact on the understanding of the plot. However, one of the most crucial moments was the unveiling of the relationship between Poppy and Prototype, Experiment 1006. While we've only seen a small part of the bigger picture, the ending of this chapter offers clear hints as to why Prototype wants to keep Poppy locked in her box. This now makes everything feel much more coherent. At the very end of the chapter, just before we face the unexpected return of Huggy, we hear a conversation between Prototype and Poppy for the first time. Actually, it's not the very first conversation, as earlier we discovered that Ollie was Prototype, and no one could have predicted this twist. But Prototype says a few key things to Poppy that stood out to me. First, he tells her to stop lying and go back home. This is an important moment to remember. He also mentions having something special for her, something that will make her not want to leave. This clearly suggests that Prototype intends to return Poppy to her box. In fact, it now becomes clear that the warnings on Poppy's door were likely not about her, but about what someone feared Prototype might do to her if we freed Poppy. Why does Prototype want to keep Poppy locked away, especially considering she seems to fear it, particularly since he shows kindness toward other experiments? I believe Chapter 4 provides all the necessary clues to understand this. We learned that the toys are gradually losing control. This explains why some toys behave in a friendly manner and can talk, while others resemble soulless zombies. The exact cause of this behavior is unknown, but I suspect it's related to psychological changes. Over time, toys begin to turn into what they are becoming. This makes perfect sense. The longer you spend in a toy body, the more you start to believe you are a toy. But there's another significant clue in Chapter 4 of Poppy Playtime. We find out that Doey is actually 3 children merged into one experiment: Jack, Kevin, and Matthew. This in itself is quite creepy, but there's another chilling detail. Each of these human consciousnesses had to share a single body. One of these personalities, it seems, was particularly unstable. Throughout the game, we see Doey switching between 2 personalities. Matthew is the dominant personality, the oldest of the 3 children, and a natural leader. This is why Doey chose not to leave the factory, but to return in order to protect the toys in the prison. However, sometimes we see a more playful and mischievous side of Doey. This is when Jack's personality emerges. The little boy who fell into the vat of liquid material, as shown in the VHS tape at the beginning of the game. But occasionally, we can hear the third personality manifest. For instance, when Doey gets angry, especially when it comes to the staff, his voice becomes more menacing and deeper. This subtle change becomes particularly noticeable when Doey starts speaking about his guards they watched from above. This adds another layer of complexity, suggesting that there's a dark side to Doey that is not only the product of the experiment's unnatural merging, but also a result of the twisted circumstances of their creation. As we dive deeper into the game, we may begin to see more fragmented personalities clash within these characters, especially as the toys continue to devolve and lose themselves within their new forms. It's a chilling commentary on the consequences of these failed experiments and the toll they take on the minds of the subjects trapped within them. What's most intriguing is how these personalities affect the game's narrative. Each twist, each character's behavior, is a product of the same twisted experiment gone wrong, and the consequences of these actions are becoming harder to ignore. Again, that terrifying voice belongs to Kevin, the most problematic of the 3 children, whom the others try to hold back. In Chapter 4, the scientists explain that just one emotional breakdown was enough to destroy the experiment. And we see this happening at the end of the game when Doey transforms into his monstrous form. The emotional blow of failing to save the toys shattered Matthew's spirit, giving Kevin the chance to break free. But this isn't the first instance of a toy breaking down. Back in Chapter 2, I noticed that Mommy Longleg's behavior changed drastically. Initially, she was creepy, but still relatively friendly, playing with us, though hoping we'd fail the trials so she could devour us. However, by the end of the game, she had become an aggressive, soulless monster. Mommy became feral. Beyond the obvious changes, there was another subtle hint at this process. The eyes of Mommy changed. We also noticed this with Doey. Before he turned feral, his eyes were empty black holes, but when he transformed, they became red. This is solid proof that toys become aggressive when their minds break down. Due to hunger, the red mist, the trauma from the experiments, and the daily horrors of the factory, both before and after Joy Hour, these toys are gradually losing their sanity. All of them are just one step away from becoming feral. It seems that Stella Graber figured this out earlier. In the note from Kissy Missy in Chapter 4, we learn that Stella understood that for Kissy, the most important thing was to return to normalcy. These children who had become toys were locked in cages, and Kissy only wanted to return to her old room. Stella mentions a significant improvement in her condition when she was allowed to communicate with others and recommends giving her more freedom within the factory. But here's where things get really interesting. If all the experiments gradually become feral, then why hasn't Poppy, the oldest of the living experiments, become like that yet? It turns out she already is. Many have noticed that in Chapter 4, Poppy's eyes have become blood red. This could actually be seen at the end of Chapter 3 when she's in the elevator. This ties into one of my old theories about Poppy. Back in Chapter 2, when we saved Poppy from Mommy, her pupils were dilated and she seemed a little out of it. This progression from the first chapter and the second to where we are now seems like a logical continuation of the same process happening with the other toys. But why is this happening to Poppy only now? Because she had been locked in her box for a long time, which could be described as a primitive form of stasis. It's fascinating to think about how Poppy's experience mirrors that of the other toys, yet her mental state might have been stunted by her prolonged confinement. The game has hinted at her slow descent into madness, much like the others. Perhaps the key difference is that Poppy's mind hasn't fully deteriorated, or perhaps it's just a matter of time before she becomes the same as the others. This adds a layer of complexity to her character. Her seemingly calm, almost innocent demeanor up until now could be hiding the beginning of her transformation. It's chilling to consider that, like the other toys, Poppy might eventually lose herself to the factory's horrors, becoming just another feral experiment. This progression might be one of the most unnerving aspects of the game, showing the slow, tragic breakdown of these characters who were once human. What do you think will happen to Poppy as we move deeper into the story? Even in this state, Poppy has repeatedly shown the same emotional outbursts as the other toys. We've seen this in the music video by CG5, which took place during Hour of Joy, and we see it again at the end of Chapter 4. I think this is connected to why Prototype behaves the way he does. If you found the secret videotape in Harley Sawyer's office, you would have learned that Prototype is working on a major breakthrough. Even after all these years, he continues to conduct experiments. This is why he kept Harley alive, so they could try to solve a problem that they couldn't fix, even when the factory was running at full capacity. I have a few theories about what this breakthrough might be. It could be an attempt to reverse the scientific process, transferring consciousness between experiments and humans, resurrecting people, or perhaps a way to stop the toys from turning into feral creatures. Whatever it is, I believe Prototype's intentions are now crystal clear, despite all his mistakes. Prototype genuinely cares about Poppy. We've seen numerous pieces of evidence that show he cares about the orphans and what they've become as a result of the experiments. We learned that Prototype was willing to leave the factory but sacrificed his own freedom to bring Theo back to the staff after he received an electric shock. We also see how Prototype acts warmly and friendly with Catnap in the music video, and there's the fact that he allowed several toys to live freely on the factory grounds for over 10 years before we arrived, even feeding them. Yes, it's a little creepy that he feeds them bodies, but what else is he supposed to do? He can't just go to the store. But why then do we see such an aggressive side of Prototype? And why does he behave this way toward Poppy? This is where we delve into the city theory. I think I have an explanation for this as well. We could consider two possible paths. One, Prototype is, as we suspected, Elliot Ludwig, and the second, Prototype considers himself and Poppy special, as they were the first experiments to come to life, so to speak. Poppy is the first experiment, and Prototype is the last, the greatest. Perhaps Prototype sees Poppy as part of his new race, with himself as the god, viewing her escape as a betrayal. But if Prototype truly is what remains of Elliot, then all these pieces of the puzzle could fit together perfectly. Elliot was described as a man who valued his family. One of the oldest theories was that his obsession with the company and science was a desperate attempt to bring back his lost child. Chapter 4 provides even more evidence to support this theory. We learn from the documentation that Poppy is likely Elliot's daughter. She mentions that she misses her father and that the company was better when he ran it. If Prototype really is Elliot, then everything falls into place. Why has he been trying to make this breakthrough for the last 10 years? Because he wants to save Poppy. This adds another layer of complexity to the relationship between Poppy and Prototype. It suggests that, in his twisted way, Prototype sees Poppy as the key to fulfilling his deepest desires, possibly even seeing her as a way to restore what he lost in the past. His obsession with keeping her locked in her box could be an attempt to protect her from the same fate that has befallen the other experiments, or it could be more selfish, seeing her as a necessary part of his own twisted vision of creation and power.